They say every old house has its secrets, but I never believed that until I moved into the Withers estate. The house was a relic, a sprawling Victorian structure perched on the edge of a forgotten town, its windows like blind eyes staring out over the tangled garden. I was drawn to it for reasons I couldn't explain, perhaps the price, perhaps the promise of solitude, or perhaps something deeper, something the house itself wanted. The first days passed in a haze of dust and sunlight. I spent my time unpacking, exploring the creaking corridors, and trying to ignore the way the floorboards seemed to groan beneath my feet, as if protesting my presence. The house was mostly empty, save for a few pieces of heavy, antique furniture and a thick layer of dust that coated every surface. But there was one place that stood out from the rest, the door at the end of the upstairs hallway. It was an ordinary door, painted the same faded white as the others, but something about it unsettled me. It was always cold to the touch, even when the rest of the house was warm. The previous owner, a gaunt old woman with trembling hands, had pressed the keys into my palm and whispered, "Don't go into the mirror room at night." I'd laughed it off at the time, thinking it was just the rambling of a superstitious mind. But now, standing before the door, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. For days I avoided it. I told myself I was too busy, that there was no need to open every room. But the house seemed to press in on me, the silence growing heavier with each passing night. I began to hear thin, soft footsteps in the hallway, the faint sound of whispering behind closed doors, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger, until finally, on the fifth night, I found myself standing before the door, the key trembling in my hand. The lock turned with a reluctant click, and the door swung open on silent hinges. The air inside was icy, colder than anywhere else in the house, and smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, with faded wallpaper peeling from the walls and a single, enormous mirror dominating the far side. The mirror was old, its surface mottled with age, the ornate frame carved with strange, twisting patterns that seemed to writhe in the dim light. I stepped inside, the floorboards protesting beneath my weight. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, and I was alone with my reflection. For a moment, nothing happened. I stared at myself, pale, tired, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. But then, as I looked deeper, I noticed something strange. The room behind me in the mirror seemed different. The wallpaper was whole, the colors brighter, and the air seemed to shimmer with a faint silvery light. And then I saw it a shadow, moving just at the edge of the glass. It was subtle at first, a flicker of darkness, but as I watched, it grew more distinct. A figure, tall and thin, with limbs too long and a face lost in shadow, stood just behind my reflection. My heart hammered in my chest. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a product of my tired mind. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house felt different, heavier, darker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Sleep did not come easily. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the mirror room. In my dream, I stood before the glass, unable to move, as the shadowy figure crept closer and closer, its hands reaching out for me. I woke with a start, drenched in cold sweat, the echo of its whisper still ringing in my ears. "You see me now." The next morning, I found the door to the mirror room ajar, though I was certain I had closed it. A cold draft seeped from the darkness within, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the shadows. I shut the door, locking it tight, but the sense of unease lingered. Over the next few days, the house grew stranger. I would catch glimpses of movement in the corners of my eyes, reflections that didn't quite match my own. Sometimes when I passed a mirror or a window, I would see the tall, thin figure standing just behind me, its face a blur of darkness. The whispers grew louder, filling the silence with words I couldn't quite understand. I tried to leave the house, but every time I reached the front door, something would stop me, a forgotten item, a sudden chill, the feeling that I was being watched. At night, I would hear footsteps pacing the hallway outside my room, stopping just outside my door. Once, I woke to find the mirror room key lying on my pillow, though I had hidden it in a drawer. I began to realize that the house did not want me to leave. It wanted me to return to the mirror room. On the 7th night, I gave in. I took the key, my hands shaking, and walked down the hallway. The door was already open, the darkness inside deeper than before. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me, sealing me in with the mirror. This time, my reflection was not alone. The air in the mirror room was thick, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were holding their breath. I stood frozen, my eyes locked on the glass. The room seemed to shrink around me, the faded wallpaper curling inward, the floorboards groaning beneath my feet. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the silence. One moment it was behind me, the next it was beside me, its elongated hand reaching out, fingers splayed like the legs of a spider. I stumbled backward, but the door behind me would not budge. I rattled the handle, pounded on the wood, but it was as if the house itself had sealed me in. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was closer still, its hand now pressed flat against the glass, directly opposite my own. I tumbled through darkness cold and endless, the air thick with whispers and the distant sound of laughter. When I finally landed, it was with a jarring thud on a hard, cold floor. I watched in horror as its hand pressed against the inside of the glass, the surface rippling like water beneath its touch. The glass was freezing, burning my skin with its unnatural chill. The wallpaper was whole, the colors vibrant, the air filled with a silvery, unnatural light. I tried to call out, but no words left my lips. My voice was swallowed by the silence, leaving only the frantic pounding of my heart. But everything was reversed, as if I had stepped into a photograph developed the wrong way round. The shadows pooled at my feet, swirling around me like living smoke. I felt them brush against my skin, cold and oily, leaving trails of numbness wherever they touched. The furniture was on the opposite side, the door on the left instead of the right. Even the dust motes in the air seemed to drift backward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the surface began to soften, my hands sinking in as if the glass had turned to liquid. The last thing I saw before the world went black was my reflection, still smiling, still watching, as the figure behind it stepped forward, merging with my double, becoming one. The mirror stood before me, its surface cracked, but I could still see my reflection, only now. There was something different in its eyes. But as I ran down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror, and for a split second, my reflection did not follow, something cold and hungry, and not entirely my own. My reflection stared back at me, but it was not alone. My own reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and terrified, but there was something wrong. The figure leaned in, its mouth close to my reflection's ear, and whispered something I could not hear. My reflection only watched, its eyes dark and empty, the figure behind it growing more distinct, more real. My reflection nodded, its smile growing wider, more twisted, until it was a grotesque parody of my own face. The reflection did not move as I did. It stood perfectly still, its eyes fixed on mine, a slow, unnatural smile spreading across its face. The tall, thin figure was there again, standing just behind my mirrored self, its face still shrouded in shadow, its presence radiating a cold, unnatural malice. I tried to move, to turn away, but my body felt heavy, as if invisible hands were pressing down on my shoulders. Then, the figure in the mirror moved. The hallway beyond was shrouded in shadow, but I could sense movement, something crawling, slithering just out of sight. The air grew colder, the light dimming as the shadows crept closer, reaching for me with long, grasping fingers. It did not walk or glide. It simply shifted, as if reality itself had bent to its will. A cold, electric fear shot through me. I don't know what compelled me, curiosity, terror, or some force beyond my understanding, but I raised my hand and placed it against the mirror. Panic surged through me. I tried to pull away, but the mirror held me fast, its surface clinging to my skin like tar. The figure's hand closed over mine, its grip impossibly strong, and I felt a jolt of icy pain shoot up my arm. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me, and then suddenly I was pulled forward, through the glass, into the world beyond. The sensation was like falling and drowning at the same time. I opened my eyes and gasped. I was still in the mirror room, or so it seemed. But the worst part was the silence. It was absolute, oppressive, as if sound itself had been banished from this place. I turned to the mirror now, a window into the room I had left behind. Behind my reflection, the tall figure loomed, its hands resting on my double shoulders. I pounded on the glass, desperate to break through, but the surface was solid, unyielding. Suddenly, the door in the reversed room creaked open. I spun around, my heart racing. I backed away, pressing myself against the mirror, but there was nowhere to run. Then, a voice echoed in my mind, not spoken, but felt, a vibration deep in my bones. "You are not alone here." The shadows surged upward, engulfing me in darkness. I screamed, but no sound escaped. When I awoke, I was lying on the floor of the mirror room. The air was stale, the light dim. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and fled the room, slamming the door behind me. It stood still, smiling that same twisted smile, as the shadowy figure watched from just behind my shoulder. Ethan's world had shrunk to the size of his bathroom. Days blurred together, marked only by the rituals he performed in front of the mirror. Sometimes when he raised his left hand, the reflection would hesitate, as if considering whether to follow. Its mouth hung open, eyes wide and unblinking, as if screaming in a soundless void. He'd wake up gasping, heart pounding, the taste of fear thick on his tongue. No sound, no sync. Just lips forming silent words, over and over. Other times, it would move in perfect sync, but Ethan could feel the effort behind it, like a puppeteer yanking invisible strings. He barely remembered the last time he'd slept through the night. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant city traffic, but the silence inside him was louder. He stood inches from the glass, staring into his own eyes, searching for any sign of the person he used to be. The reflection's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile, but the eyes that stared back were too direct, too knowing. He tried to act normal, making coffee, chatting about work, but his gaze kept drifting to the bathroom door. Eventually, he couldn't resist. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Ethan almost relaxed, while Ethan himself stood perfectly still. They seemed to look through him, not at him, as if measuring his soul. "Dude, you look like you haven't slept in a week." It was the silence of waiting for something to happen. He'd stopped telling himself it was just stress. The mirror's tricks had become too precise, too deliberate. Slowly, it slid back into view, wearing that same too-wide smile. The dreams were the worst. Every night, he found himself standing in the bathroom, staring at his own unmoving reflection. He was too busy watching the mirror, waiting for the next move. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan shuffled to the bathroom, the floorboards cold beneath his feet. The mirror greeted him with its usual foggy haze, the smudge right where his face should be. Every time he blinked, he feared he'd open his eyes and find himself trapped on the other side, mouthing silent pleas for help that no one would ever hear. He leaned in, searching for any sign of normalcy, but his own eyes looked back at him, hollow and exhausted. He turned away to splash water on his face. When he looked up, his reflection was already staring, mouth moving. Ethan's blood ran cold. He watched, transfixed, as his reflection mouthed something again and again. He tried to read the shape of the words, his own lips moving in unconscious mimicry. "Let me out. He stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet tile, heart hammering in his chest. "Let me out." He grabbed a pen and scrawled the phrase on a scrap of toilet paper. "Let me out." The next night, he tried to confront it. He tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but his throat was dry, the words dying before they left his mouth. Desperate for proof that he wasn't losing his mind, Ethan invited his friend Mark over the next afternoon. "Hey Mark, come check this out," he said, forcing a laugh. "I think my mirror's haunted." Mark rolled his eyes but followed him. They stood side by side in the cramped bathroom, their reflections staring back. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. In the mirror, his own reflection turned and walked away, disappearing out of frame. He gasped, grabbing Mark's arm. "Did you see that?" Mark frowned. "See what?" Ethan stared at the empty space in the mirror where his reflection should have been. Mark left soon after, muttering something about stress and needing to get some rest. Ethan didn't argue. He was no longer sure which side of the glass he belonged on. And every night, the words echoed in his mind, "Let me out." The city was shrouded in a heavy, unnatural silence that night, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat alone in his apartment, the only light coming from the blue glow of his phone screen. He scrolled aimlessly, trying to distract himself, but every shadow in the corners of the room seemed to pulse with a quiet, watchful intent. The bulb above him buzzed, then died, plunging everything into darkness. He stared, waiting for his reflection to appear, but the glass was blank, just a flat, endless gray, like the screen of a dead television. No fog, no smudge, no hint of his own face. Just nothing. The air in the bathroom grew colder, the shadows deeper. The glass strained, groaning under the pressure, until finally, with a sickening elasticity, a face pressed forward from the other side. It was his face, but not quite. The features were too smooth, too calm, the eyes too still. The reflection's lips parted, and in a voice that was both his own and not his own, it whispered, "You look tired." The reflection's smile widened, impossibly wide, the eyes never leaving his. The mouth was set in a placid, almost serene smile, utterly at odds with the horror of the moment. The mirror began to bulge outward, the glass warping and stretching like soft plastic. Ethan felt a pressure building in his chest, a sense of vertigo, as if he were about to fall forward and be swallowed whole. He strained to read its lips, but the movements were slow, deliberate, almost mocking. The only word he could make out was soon. Ethan's mind raced, searching for an explanation, a way out, but there was nothing, no logic, no escape, only the certainty that something had crossed a boundary that should never have been breached. The last thing Ethan saw before the light died was his own face, calm and patient, waiting on the other side of the glass. The reflection's eyes met his, and for a moment, Ethan felt as if he were looking into a deep, bottomless well. He could feel the presence in the mirror, waiting, watching, biding its time. He pressed his back against the door, heart pounding, breath coming in shallow gasps. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The candle flickered, the flame shrinking as if suffocated by the cold. The boundary had been crossed. The thing in the mirror was no longer content to watch. The handprints multiplied, smearing across the surface, leaving trails of condensation and something darker, almost oily. When the power finally returned, the bathroom light flickered on, harsh and blinding. The mirror was flat and ordinary again, reflecting only Ethan's pale, haggard face. Ethan could see the reflection's breath fogging the inside of the glass, could see the slow, deliberate blink of its eyes. It raised a hand, palm out, and pressed it against the surface. Ethan, as if compelled, raised his own hand to meet it. The glass was ice cold, burning his skin, but he couldn't pull away. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The city outside was silent. Power outage. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, a primal fear rising in his throat. The grayness deepened, swirling with shadows. Ethan leaned closer, squinting, and that's when he saw a handprint pressed against the inside of the mirror. The fingers were long, splayed wide, the palm flat against the glass. Another handprint appeared beside it, then another, each one clearer, more desperate, as if someone or something was trapped just beyond the surface, clawing to get out. He fumbled in a drawer for the emergency candle, hand shaking, and struck a match. The tiny flame sputtered, then bloomed, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. The mirror in the bathroom called to him, a silent pressure at the back of his mind, impossible to ignore. He tried to resist, but the urge was overwhelming. He needed to look, to check, to see if the reflection was still there, if it was still him. He stood, his body heavy with exhaustion, and shuffled down the dark hallway. The apartment felt colder than usual, the air thick and unmoving. As he reached for the bathroom light, the world flickered. He stepped into the bathroom, candle held high. The mirror loomed before him, larger than it had ever seemed, swallowing the weak light. Ethan's breath caught. He waved his hand in front of the glass, moved the candle back and forth, but the mirror remained empty, indifferent. He felt a sudden, irrational urge to run, but his feet were rooted to the cold tile. Then, slowly, something began to change. A faint outline appeared in the center of the glass, as if the surface was thickening, becoming viscous. Ethan stumbled back, the candle nearly slipping from his grasp. He watched, paralyzed, as the bulge grew, pushing further into the room. Ethan's own face stared back at him, separated only by a thin membrane of warped glass. The face in the mirror leaned closer, the glass stretching, thinning, until Ethan could see the fine details of its skin, the faint lines around its eyes, the subtle twitch of a muscle in its jaw. The words seemed to echo inside Ethan's skull, reverberating through his bones. He staggered back, clutching the sink for support. The bathroom felt smaller, the walls closing in. The air was thick, suffocating, heavy with the scent of cold glass and something metallic. The face in the mirror pressed harder, the glass bowing outward, threatening to burst. For a moment, they stood like that man and reflection, separated by a membrane thinner than a thought. The reflection's mouth moved again, forming words Ethan couldn't hear. The candle guttered, the flame shrinking to a pinprick. The shadows surged, swallowing the room. Darkness fell, absolute and final. Ethan stood alone in the blackness, the cold seeping into his bones. He didn't know how long he stood there, minutes, hours, an eternity. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that something had changed. It wanted out. And Ethan was so tired. Ethan woke to sunlight streaming through the window, warm and golden, painting the walls in gentle hues. For a moment he lay still, letting the light wash over him, feeling the softness of the sheets, the familiar weight of his own body. His reflection smiled back calm, composed, almost radiant. He looked good, better than he had in months. The dark circles under his eyes were gone, his skin clear, his posture relaxed. He felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, almost serene. He blinked, trying to remember the night before, but his memories were hazy, like a dream slipping away upon waking. He sat up, stretching, and caught a glimpse of himself in the bedroom mirror. He moved through the apartment, making coffee, humming a tune he couldn't quite place. The bathroom door stood open, the mirror above the sink gleaming, perfectly clean. He paused, staring at his reflection. It moved in perfect sync, every gesture, every blink, every smile. No lag, no fog, no smudge. Just a flawless, ordinary mirror. His phone buzzed. Messages from friends and coworkers. He screamed, but no sound escaped. He pounded on the glass, but his hands left no mark. He could only watch, a silent witness, as the days passed and the seasons changed, as the new Ethan thrived and the old Ethan faded into memory. He watched, helpless, as the other Ethan, his replacement, lived his life, wore his skin, spoke with his voice. He watched as strangers toured the rooms, admired the view, commented on the beautiful, spotless bathroom mirror. Sometimes he would see flickers of movement in the glass shadows, faces, other lost souls pressed against the surface, their eyes wide with terror and longing. She paused in the bathroom, wiping a smudge from the glass, frowning at the faint, persistent fog that never quite went away. He realized with a growing sense of horror that he was not alone. The mirror was full of them, all the ones who had come before, all the ones who had been replaced. He saw friends laugh with him, saw his parents embrace him, saw strangers smile at him on the street. "You seem different lately." He felt sociable, energized, eager to reconnect. She only saw her own reflection, smiling back, calm and serene. The anxiety, the exhaustion, the gnawing sense of dread all gone, as if they'd never existed. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand in front of the bathroom mirror, staring into his own eyes, searching for something he couldn't name. The mirror always stared back, calm and untroubled. "You look great. Glad to see you're back to your old self. We should catch up soon," he replied with easy confidence, his fingers flying over the screen. He laughed at jokes, made plans for the weekend, even flirted with the barista at the corner cafe. People commented on the change. "You're glowing. You seem so much more confident. It's like you're a new person." He smiled, accepting the praise, feeling it settle comfortably on his skin. Days passed. Ethan returned to work, his performance sharp and focused. But somewhere, deep inside, a faint echo of unease lingered, a whisper at the edge of consciousness, a chill that crept up his spine when he caught his reflection out of the corner of his eye. And then one night, as the city slept and the apartment was silent, a voice began to narrate from the darkness behind the glass. "I am still here." Ethan's consciousness floated in a cold, gray void, pressed against the inside of the mirror. He tried to warn them, to reach out, but the glass was impenetrable, the world beyond forever out of reach. Time lost all meaning in the mirror. He watched as the new Ethan packed boxes, cleaned the apartment, and taped a "for rent" sign to the window. And then, one day, a new tenant arrived, a young woman, tired and hopeful, dragging her suitcase down the hall. Ethan pressed his face to the inside of the mirror, screaming silently, pounding with all his strength, but she didn't see him. The cycle had begun again. And behind the glass, Ethan screamed, unheard forever.